Bears, demonologist, paranormal investigator, Brian McKinley, author, and currently guest of honor.
Currently guest, so
well, honor's relative.
Yeah, I didn't get a limo. Usually our guests get a limo.
Misha Campbell, sidekick.
So, welcome to tonight's show. The number is at the bottom of your screen if anybody wants to call in. We're going to mostly focus on that as we always do at the half-hour mark and then closer to the end of the show. So, Brian,
Yes.
if anybody's wondering, his 3 fine books are visible on the screen now.
Yes, right here.
Vampires are standing by at Amazon to take your orders.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we have
All books proceeds go to benefit starving vampires, by the way.
we have Drawing Dead, Ancient Blood, and Ancient Enemies.
Yes.
So, I guess the obvious first question is, given the topic of all 3 books, why vampires?
It's one of the questions I get asked a lot.
It is the same.
It's an obvious one, but yeah, it's kind of weird. It started through a whole number of different things. I didn't initially want to write about vampires necessarily. When I first, I always wanted to be a writer, but originally I was into science fiction. And then later I got into psychological thrillers. All through high school, I was trying to write the next, like, Silence of the Lambs or, or something like that, coming up with things. And nothing really took off. Eventually, I wound up getting into vampires more as a thing that I like to read about. And then I started role-playing. And I tried to find books that were similar to the role-playing game that I played, where vampires had a society and there was, politics and intrigue and all of the cool characters. And the focus was on the vampires and not some group of humans going around killing vampires. Because, as much fun as that is, the vampires in those stories usually aren't terribly interesting. They're usually pretty typical vampires. They're monsters. They die, and that's that. So I started writing because I couldn't find the books out there that I wanted to read. So I ended up having to write them. I started them as I started Ancient Blood anyway as a screenplay. I wanted it to be a movie. It was around the time that Interview with the Vampire had just come out as a film, and I thought, wow, if I could take something like that combined with like The Godfather or Lion in Winter, Dangerous Liaisons, one of those kind of things, I thought that'd be really cool. So that was the genesis, and I couldn't sell the screenplay to save my life. Tried a bunch of other screenplays, couldn't sell them either. Was advised by an agent, these are really intricate and very, intelligent and have a really good setting. You should try writing it as a book. And I went, okay. So I started writing a sort of a novelization of the screenplay, but it went way beyond that. And that's how Ancient Blood came about. And from there, by the time I was done Ancient Blood, I had the idea for Drawing Dead, and I knew I wanted to continue the story and do
So I have a question.
I put a ghost to sleep or something.
I know.
I'm hearing snoring from somewhere.
No, so a friend of Amisha and I, actually, Glenn wants to know if this is a series.
Yes. The first 2 books, Ancient Blood and Ancient Enemies, are directly related. This is the first book, then that's the sequel. Drawing Dead is in the same universe, takes place in a different time period and with a different protagonist, but the character's actually mentioned and shows up in Ancient Blood and Ancient Enemies. So they're all interconnected, and both of them are series. Phelan's got his own series, and Avery's 3 books are, I'm working on the 3rd one to the Ancient series.
I was going to say, you've got more in the works. I know that. We talked about it.
Yeah, I'm currently working on the sequel to Drawing Dead and the 3rd installment of Ancient Blood, and I have various other projects as well that are kind of tied in.
You have a werewolf book coming in.
Yeah. I have a werewolf book that actually was the first novel I tried to write. I started with that one, and it wound up being a little too ambitious. I only got about halfway through it, and it was just too big and sprawling. Too many characters. I was trying to reinvent the wheel like most young writers do. I had every chapter was from a different character's point of view, and I wrote in an entirely different style for each character and tried to do different formatting. It was so ridiculous.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty huge task
It
you
was-
just gave yourself.
Oh yeah. No, I never do anything by halves. It was ridiculous. Like most writers, I thought I'm gonna write this monumental bestseller. So it wasn't until I started doing Ancient Blood and I just went, you know what? This second time around, I'm keeping it simple. I just did the whole thing from Avery's point of view, figured ways around it, and it worked. So that was the first book I got finished. But I would like to get that werewolf book done. I want to fix it up. I want to redo it in a way that works and finally bring it back out because the story does actually tie in.
So yes, you have. I mean, your books are about vampires. But you have one about werewolves coming in, and then there's of course the vampires in the books that I always find so interesting because I'm me, the Shen.
Yeah. I tried to. I wanted to address when I started doing research, there were so many cool different types of vampires in folklore, and most of them weren't the standard European, shambling corpse, which isn't what I use anyway. But I do have them make an appearance. They're in there as revenants. They just tend to be lackeys for other people because they don't have much going on upstairs. So
I would say that particular motif of vampires, which is very Eastern European, are, in my opinion, largely where we get our modern concept of zombies.
Oh yeah. That was where they sort of morphed and became zombies, largely thanks to George Romero, unwittingly, from what I understand.
Although I thought from what I understood that his inspiration, or at least one of his inspirations, was I Am Legend, which is a vampire story.
It is. It's a more of a scientific based vampire, but a plague that's released, but they do share traits with the folklore vampires. And he was inspired by that, and also the legend of the Indian ghoul, who were creatures that would eat the dead in graveyards and stuff.
Although, as I understand it, ghouls are actually a type of jinn.
Maybe,
Not
yeah.
and jinn are really, really, really complicated.
Yeah, that's a whole nother. But anyway, so to get back to your point about the Shen, the Shen, which is what I call my Asian variety, but really they were meant to represent all the types of vampires in folklore that are more ephemeral, that are like ghosts or spirits, manifesting demons, things like that tend to feed on psychic energy and emotion rather than blood. So I wanted there to be a variety of types of vampire, and as the series goes on, I actually introduced more than those two. There are a couple of new ones that pop up in Ancient Enemies as well. So I just kind of get the idea being that my type of vampire, which is a largely science-based vampire, because they could control their ability to reproduce and they could bring in new recruits whenever they needed to, they essentially moved in like colonists and wiped out the indigenous populations of most of the world's vampires.
Gee, that's not an obvious parallel for anything.
Not at all. There's no symbolism whatsoever in my work.
None whatsoever.
But yeah, so that was very deliberate. So my vampires tend to represent, they're almost entirely white, European men, with a couple of notable exceptions, and yeah, they sort of represent the traditional old European colonial mentality.
The English Empire,
Yep.
Any of the empires.
The Romans, the English, the Byzantines, the American Empire.
Although we've never technically been an empire.
We've never called ourselves an empire, but we sure behave like one.
Well, we've never been an empire because we never actually had an emperor either.
Well, that's actually a technicality. The Romans weren't really much of an empire until long after they had already started conquering everybody around.
True, but
They
it
did that
did
as a
eventually
republic.
become a formal empire under Julius, basically under Julius, and then officially under Augustus.
Yeah, really Augustus.
So I was going to say, it's kind of interesting that what we think of as a traditional monarchy is like, man, but the first thing we come up with when we think of British royalty are women.
Mhm. Yeah, Britain is one of the countries that's had the most successful female monarchs in its history.
Glenn Chad has a question that you and I knowing her shouldn't surprise you, sweetie. She wants to know, in your books, the type of vampires did they touch on other cultured vampires, i.e., the Filipino vampire, the aswang?
That one I don't have specifically, but I do reference a lot of the others. I have in the second book, Ancient Enemies, I have an Adzi, which is an African type of vampire. The Aswang, I've looked into them, and because of my presentations and stuff, I just have no idea how I would work them into the story, because they really are kind of just a lone monster that just in some of the stories they get on the top roof of your house and lower their tongue down into your chimney and attack you while you're sleeping and drink through your tongue.
Female-based ones, if I remember correctly, the female and sort of burnished.
What was that?
We're having a hard time hearing you.
Oh, lovely.
You have to turn on your microphone.
It's on. That's the problem.
Huh. What was the question?
Is the
Are we gonna
volume
repeat
up?
it?
Aren't they mainly like female dominated?
Yeah, Aswang. He's asking if the Aswang are female dominated. I'm not an expert by any means, but I think usually Aswang are women, aren't they?
I think so. I'm not sure if they really even have if the sex of them matters. There are a lot of vampires folklorically that are predominantly female. You've got things like the Lamia, you've got the Civitasio.
My favorite, the Penelegans.
The Penangolin. They are hilarious. Well, yeah,
They're awesome.
we've talked about them, but yeah, it's an attached woman. It's a woman's head flying around with entrails,
Dragging her entrails
Yeah.
after her.
all like flaming and glowing. It's really inconspicuous. I'm
But she goes
sure.
back to her body during the day and lives as a normal person.
Yeah, that's the fun part. There are a lot of vampires that in history and folklore that pretend to lead normal lives. And even in some Eastern European folklore, the vampire returns and just starts living with its family again, and
Even
just
has children.
can have children. Yeah, it's just now it's all weird and kind of creepy, like Pet Cemetery or something. but the vampire just comes back and kind of resumes its life, and just sits around the house and makes a nuisance of itself. It's rather funny. But yeah, there's a lot of women tend to get blamed for rising again as vampires in a lot of cultures, especially
Redheads.
especially if they die in childbirth. Yeah, redheads.
The Malleus
witchcraft.
Maleficarum explicitly says that certain types of redheads are all vampires.
Yes, that's a Greek thing. There's Greeks believe that people with red hair and gray eyes were pretty much predestined to rise from the dead as vampires.
People born on Saturday, people born on Christmas, seventh son of the seventh son, which in some other cultures is
I thought they
also
were-
lucky.
Yeah, I thought they were warlocks or.
It's both.
Okay.
It goes. Well, you know as well as I do, and it's something we definitely should get into, that the modern idea of you have witches and you have vampires and
Yes.
you have werewolves. Yeah, the folklore is not that clear cut.
Yeah, werewolves, vampires, witches, ghosts,
you get into
demons,
Fae.
all kind of blur together. Fae, we have Fae vampires. The Leanne and she are they are muses that have Fae aspects to them, but they are also very vampiric. They eat and drink the blood of travelers. So,
And for that matter, there's Greek werewolves become vampires when they die.
yes, the Varkolak werewolves, when they die, they rise and they become Virkalakos vampires.
And Striga are sometimes described as vampires, sometimes described as witches.
Yeah, the Romans went
Penangolins
both.
are sometimes seen as witches, sometimes seen as vampires.
Yeah,
It-
the Odzi that I mentioned, the African, are very witchcraft oriented. The vampire aspect is kind of almost a side thing.
And there,
A lot of cultures, vampires and witches are kind of one and the same.
and to further wrap everything into more complicated terms, fairy in some Irish folklore, fairies are the spirits of the dead or the unbaptized dead.
Yeah, the she means the people of the mound, and the mounds being the burial mounds that it was believed they came from the other side, from the land of the dead.
Yeah, and it's from the aside from the paranormal guy in me, there's the folklorist to me, and it's like, yeah, it's so easy when you read modern fiction. It's like, this is one thing, this is another thing. It's like, that's cute, and it's that simple.
I think part of that is, I mean, it's for one thing with literature, it's kind of an outgrowth of literature and movies. I think is that we as an audience have come to expect everything to be in kind of neat categories. We want to categorize everything and say this is what it is. These are its traits. So like, so much nowadays you have people say, oh, well, I like the traditional vampire. And what they really mean is they like the Bram Stoker style vampire, which isn't by any stretch the traditional vampire.
Although he did more research than, say, Anne Rice.
A little bit.
Anne Rice
I
didn't
don't
do any. He
I
did
like-
a fair amount of research.
No, that's true. Anne Rice pretty much took the vampire and made it what she wanted to be, which is she was a little ahead of her time in that respect, because now that's kind of the thing to do.
I'd say largely because she inspired. And
She
we
did
can
kind
get
of
into how much
inspire
I
that
dislike
trend.
Anne Rice, but aside from that,
It's
objectively
okay. I
speaking,
still like you, Anne.
she
she was a big-
inspired these. It's like, well, she's ahead of her time. No, she inspired the trend.
Yeah. Well, there was that. She inspired me. I mean,
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't have started writing vampire fiction if I hadn't read the original Interview with the Vampire.
And also, she
her
inspired the
trilogy.
role-playing game, which also helped inspire you. So
Yes. So she had a big part, and I can't really disparage her.
It's kind of the saying I have with vampires and who we blame for being popular. And from my understanding, we don't blame anybody before Anne Rice.
credit, not blame.
Yeah, it's true.
Another good question from chat. So, given what we've been saying about the lines between different things, in particular, what do you think of the Underworld movies?
It was really funny. I have a mixed relationship and feeling with the Underworld movies, because I mentioned my werewolf story.
Mhm.
Well, originally that was a screenplay as well. It was an action movie about a bunch of werewolves going around and fighting and killing the vampires of my society. They would take out like cities and hierarchies and whatnot. They would go around and hit and strike them and do these like guerrilla raids. So I had this all written up as a cool action movie, and it got shopped around. I had an agent who was interested in it. She shopped it around, and according to her, most of the producers that she pitched the idea to couldn't get their head around it. They were like, werewolves fighting vampires. I don't get it. Why would they do that? And then a couple years later, the first Underworld movie came out.
Aside from Underworld, what about the old Universal movies? It's like, really that's a hard concept for you
Again,
guys?
yeah.
That's
For
a
me,
hard
what-
concept for you guys with the
Abbott and Costello Meet
Universal
Frankenstein features the first fight between a werewolf and a vampire.
For that
on
matter,
film.
one of the Howling movies had a vampire
Yes. Howling number 5, I believe, or 6.
in it. Yeah, and that was one of the more respected parts of the
The one with
Series.
the one with the, and the sad thing is, because I owned that movie at the time. I went out and sought it out when I was doing my research.
All the movies.
I watched every movie, good or bad, like just to see what had been done and to kind of get some ideas. And the sad thing is that one was almost kind of a decent movie. The special effects really let it down. The vampire and werewolf makeup were both terrible, but the
Yeah.
story actually wasn't that bad.
So
Which is a
what was
pity,
the
given how good
worst?
the original was.
Yeah.
What was the worst vampire movie you had to watch for research?
I remember I had to watch. Oh my god, there were so many.
There are so
Um,
many horrible vampire movies.
I didn't watch this for research, but just for fun. There was a movie called Ankle Biters
Oh,
about dwarf vampires. Just the whole thing was a bunch of like little people with fangs, and it was played like seriously. That was the sad thing. It wasn't played for comedy. Even though
So
they
it
called it a
wasn't
movie.
like an exploitation film where they know they're making over the top slot.
Oh, they knew it was an over exploitation movie. It was,
but they played it straight.
but they played it straight. They weren't like playing it for laughs. Like they thought they could actually make the dwarves frightening by putting fangs in their mouth and having that, and it really didn't work.
I'd have to say, I think the vampire movie I disliked the most, it may just be the style of the vampires. I think it was a TV movie. I forget the name of it. The main thing I remember
I'll
is
probably
about
tell you if you. give
is
me
this
hints.
woman who was like in Romania looking for her family, and the vampires are like tongue came out and split into tentacles,
I know the one you're talking about. Yeah,
and that tentacle tongue thing was just so stupid.
it was called Daughter of Darkness. Mia Farrow not Mia Farrow, Mia Sarah from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and Anthony Perkins played her father, which is interesting. It was actually a very good performance from him. But yeah, they tried to do this thing with the vampire with their tongues, and it was just a dull movie.
So
That just sounds like something that's waiting to become a hentai.
yeah.
Well, that's the thing.
Waiting.
Yeah. There we
Um,
go.
An excellent point was
That's
made in chat.
microphone works.
There's something that trumps both of our movies for worst vampire movie: Twilight.
Well, yes.
But we don't talk. One of the rules of the show is we don't talk about Twilight.
And I consider that more a terrible book than a terrible movie.
It is terrible.
Either way,
yeah.
it needs to be burned.
Yeah.
There is no Twilight. We do not acknowledge the existence of Twilight. Now, also a question: where does Helsing play into vampires? Of course, the counter I have to that question is: do you mean the movie Helsing, Helsing from Dracula, Helsing the animated series, Helsing the manga, Helsing
Yeah.
the other animated series?
It's really funny. That's another one of those things where, again, because you have a particular bone to pick with Anne Rice. My particular bone to pick is with Bram Stoker, and with all the credit he gets, and the fact that everybody keeps trying to tie everything vampires back to Dracula, and say like Helsing, Van Helsing. Okay, he was a character in Dracula. That's it.
And not even a major vampire.
No,
he
he
was an
wasn't.
expert on bloodborne disease.
Yeah, he was a physician. He wasn't like some kind of legendary vampire hunter that went around. That came about much later, and
Fan
now they,
fiction.
and now
basically.
they
Well,
use
to be-
it for everything.
Well, to be fair, Helsing himself in the book was essentially a self-insert for the author.
Yes, also
Yeah.
true.
Yep, he was a way to convey information and sound really cool and whatnot. And granted, great character, lots of fun. I always loved Edward Van Sloan in the Universal movies.
Oh yes.
He brought a great dignity and whatnot to the role. But again, just a guy. Why not have Harker? Why isn't
They've done Harker a few times.
As-
Well,
as a
not
line
Jonathan
vampire.
very often.
yeah? Jonathan Harker gets a
Mina's
pretty
been
shit.
done a couple of times.
Yeah, I was about to say it would be different with Mina. Mina, aside from the comic League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, I don't know of any other times where Mina has been in the spotlight.
There is a short-lived, although I actually enjoyed it, TV series called Demons from England. Have you seen this?
No.
So the premise is demon hunters, with the descendant of Abraham von Helsing, who's basically superpowers. Where I thought it was a little trite. Where I thought it got slightly more
Van
interesting.
Helsing is not the Slayer. Every generation is
Yeah,
not
but
a Van Helsing born.
No, well, no. In point of fact,
I'm gonna
according
say
to
it now. I think it's less to do with the character itself and more just that the name is cool.
It's
Actually-
recognized. That's why they keep bringing in Dracula.
for the
Yeah,
record, Helsing is not a Slayer; he's a Watcher. It actually came up in one of the Buffy comics.
Yeah, but
I'm sure he was.
Abraham von Helsing, and tell me that's not a cool name.
It is a cool name,
It
but
That's probably what it is. It's that it's a really cool name.
Well, I was gonna say what makes I thought Demons was sort of interesting was basically Mina's one of the demon hunters. It's modern day, so she's kept alive by the fact that she's a vampire, basically, using a serum to keep it in check. And then, lo and behold, at one point, Dracula never shows up in the series. There's a couple references to him, but it's pretty clear he's dead.
Yeah.
What I thought was more interesting, at least, is who does show up is Quincy Harker, Mina's son.
Nice.
And he's basically
See,
because of his mother.
now again, as the guy who actually killed Dracula, he doesn't get nearly as much
no, that'd be
recognition.
Quincy Morris. This is Quincy Harker, who is
yeah.
named in his honor.
As the son.
Mentioned at the very end of the book.
No, I was just taking a tangent. There is
Yeah.
also, by the way, a book called Mina, which is Dracula entirely from Mina's point of view. So there is that. So she has gotten some stuff, but yeah.
There is a fun series.
I'd like to see Lord Riven make a comeback. The
There's a
original
book
vampire.
I had as a kid that it was basically a kid wannabe vampire hunter
Mhm.
who basically, and I think this even was a few years before Interview with the Vampire, but basically it was Interview with the Vampire before Interview with the Vampire. He was a huge vampire fanboy. He was asked to write a paper for school, so he decided he was going to write it about vampires. He was trying to figure out how to get a primary source. He gets approached essentially by Dracula,
Oh, nice.
and then introduced not just to Dracula. So the three vampire characters of the book are Dracula, Riven, and Camilla.
Oh, nice. So at least they paid tribute to all three of the
Yeah, it's not just
the literary
Dracula.
originals. The only one missing is Varney, but then again, he jumped into a volcano, so he wasn't available, I guess.
Yeah, well, that and the consistency of Varney is.
Well, there is no consistency.
Exactly.
But again, that's another one where it's like people don't sort of jump on that literary pedigree
Often.
as very often. Like you don't see.
Marvel Comics brought up Varney, though.
Okay, cool. Like,
'Cause
I'd like to see more tribute paid to some of these older, more forgotten
Basically,
kind of
as I
literary
understand
ancestors.
it, in Marvel, Dracula is currently the king of vampires, but he took the title from Varney, who was originally from Atlantis,
Oh, nice.
which is in fact in Varney the
Which is
Vampire.
a part of the mythos, yeah, the complicated.
Yet another
part of
question
the
from Glenn
consistent
Chen.
mythos.
And Glenn Chen, don't feel bad about the weird questions. You're keeping things going. It's all good.
yeah.
She wants to know, now when it comes to vampires, werewolves, etc., why do you think other monsters are added, like Frankenstein's monster, etc.? Is it because they don't die, that they can be added in any timeline? How do you believe vampires can die?
All right. Well, that's a couple questions.
Yeah.
So let me tackle them one at a time. The reason I think, for one, the Monster Mash thing is just fun and cool. Ever since Universal did it, and I think that's where that really comes from, is in people's minds. Dracula, the Wolfman, the Mummy, the Creature from the Black Lagoon, Frankenstein's monster.
I
We're all
remember-
kind of part of that same
Shared,
team.
it's a original shared universe.
Exactly.
I don't know, one of the Silent Hill movies I had the unfortunate pleasure of watching had three good things in it. One of them was a monster fight between Pyramid Head and their new special monster.
Mm.
Well-
And that was, it's like, yes, monster fight, yes, that's always cool. That's automatically
Yeah.
10 points in the coolometer.
Yep.
It's also why Dracula gets added so much. It's like, what can we do that's really cool? I know, let's have them fight Dracula.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got Dracula.
Eventually
What would be
everybody-
really cool?
Yeah.
I know, let's have them fight Frankenstein.
Yeah. Scooby Doo versus Dracula.
Yeah.
You know, it's like they bring them back. They're kind of perennial. It's like Sherlock Holmes, certain other characters that just kind of never really go away. They get reinvented for
Well,
each new
specifically,
generation.
and this is one of the things that, as much as I like many of the things Disney is doing right now, I don't like things that Disney has done.
Yeah.
Which is, prior to Mickey Mouse, basically, you had this wonderful idea of public domain, that anything that after 50 years after the author wrote it falls into public domain, anyone can use the character.
Yeah.
Sherlock Holmes is public domain. Anyone listening right now can go write a Sherlock Holmes story. They don't have to pay royalties to anybody, because no one is even allowed to own rights to them anymore.
And by the way, if you
Dracula.
look on Amazon, it seems like almost everyone has written a
Yeah.
Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, this is true.
story.
You know, Dracula, same thing. He's
Yep.
public domain. Frankenstein, public domain.
Oh, fun fact. While Sherlock Holmes is public domain, apparently Moriarty is not. Yeah, very strange.
Maybe because of when it was written.
Yeah, it was like some different
Yeah.
because of the circumstances that he wrote that story. There's actually a family that owns the copyright to Professor Moriarty, which was interesting because the Star Trek: The Next Generation producers found that out when they wrote an
The
episode.
Moriarty.
Yeah, they wrote the
It was
episode.
an interesting
Moriarty.
episode.
It was very
Um,
good. Yeah.
I want to give a shout out for the number in case
Yes.
anybody wants to call in at this point.
Yes,
Given
let's
it's
get some
now 7
questions.
o'clock. The number is 609-807-2492, 609-807-2492. Feel free to call in, Glenn Chen. Feel free to call in directly and ask your questions if you like.
Sure.
We've had a lot of good questions so far.
Yeah. So the second part was what? How can a vampire die?
The other part is how can a vampire die?
Well, that's a long one.
Surprisingly hard.
Not always.
Yeah, but a lot of the classic methods are actually more meant to stop them than kill them.
Yeah. Well, because a lot of times they figured you didn't really kill them. You just put them away until they stopped being a nuisance, and kind of went like staking was originally meant to pin them into their coffin or into the
Also
earth.
commonly used for ghosts.
Yeah,
Yeah,
interesting.
you nail the ghost into the ground, and there's even stories of people like brushing up against the stakes and hearing this voice come out of the ground. You pull and I'll push.
Nice. I did not
So
know
it's
that.
essentially putting somebody in timeout.
Yeah, essentially.
Pretty much.
Cutting the
got-
head off,
Natural
you just put it
timeout.
down between the legs so it couldn't reach it.
Right.
put it
Yeah,
back.
cutting off the head. Fire was always a good one.
Fire is pretty much the most reliable way to kill
Fire
a
is pretty
vampire.
universal. There were some where you would bury the vampire upside down, facing the ground, so that when it dug, it would dig further into the earth. You'd cut off its
Nailing
head,
its head to
stuff
the
it.
coffin.
Yeah, cut off its head, stuff it with garlic, put it in a bag, and throw it into running water. Was a popular one.
Apparently, we're getting a little bit of feedback
Yeah.
here.
Is that because you have your thing up?
No, I've muted everything I can possibly mute on it.
Put it in a bag and throw it into running water.
Where is that coming from?
That is weird.
It's like, no, I've got it muted there, I've got it muted there, I've got it muted. It's like I've completely muted that.
I think something's messing with us again.
Okay, let me try closing my Facebook and see what happens.
And because I only hear it over the speakers,
Yeah,
over the
okay.
headphones. So,
Well, it
but-
stops now.
but yeah, but there are
And Glenn Chen's at work, so she won't be calling to join us, sadly.
all right, but there are literally dozens and dozens of
forget
ways to kill different kinds of
the
vampires.
country, but there's a
depending
country
on-
that actually put them on trial.
probably
Eastern Europe,
in Prussia, not Austria.
which
had
yeah.
had a pretty big Poland had a pretty big vampire scare. Yeah,
New
there were-
England did too. For
New
that matter.
England did.
Mercy Brown.
Yeah, I think didn't we just have? There was like the anniversary. I saw a post
I didn't see it.
about it being like the 300th anniversary of like the Mercy Brown case.
One of these days, the three of us have got to make a road trip to Rhode Island and go see her grave.
Yeah, that would be cool. We could do like a thing from there. But yeah, so there's lots and lots of ways to kill a vampire, and in some cases you can just shoot them.
Yep.
Ironically,
The
some-
first literary vampire resident was just shot with regular bullets.
Yep.
It didn't take when he was left out in moonlight.
Yeah, he was allowed to recharge and
Speaking
came
of,
back.
fun fact, silver is not really part of werewolf lore, but it is part of vampire lore.
Yeah, so many things that people think of are ancient werewolf lore
Actually,
Are
just about everything.
trace back to Kurt Siodmak, the writer of the Wolfman screenplay. The poem that is famous that came from that movie, completely made up.
The idea that they can only transform under the full moon.
Yes, yeah. The full moon thing was largely his.
Silver.
The being bitten and turning into one, and acting as a curse.
Curses.
I know
from
that-
this a lot of
I know
werewolf
that
legends.
had been around, but he really popularized it and kind of turned it into the definitive. This
Yeah.
is always to where you almost never see movies about the real tradition where people would make deals to become werewolves. They would use a spell,
Well,
or
also
they
what
would
you're into is
make a deal with the devil.
In most legends where it's a curse, Like there are various druids that were cursed by St. Patrick to become
Yes.
wolves. And ladies and gentlemen, we're going to, just like we had our special Christmas episode, when St. Patrick's Day rolls around, we're going to have a St. Patrick's Day episode. Because good heavens, the wackiness with St. Patrick
Yes.
and the things that he claimed to do.
It won't even involve beer and dressing up in crappy leprechaun costumes.
There will be a lot to say from the back table.
Oh, yeah.
I'll bet.
Patrick was a character, but he cursed several druids to turn into wolves. Of course, Zeus, king of the Greek gods, cursed Lycus to become a wolf, which is where we get the word lycanthropy.
Yep.
But in most of those stories, either one, they're a wolf forever,
Yep. Yeah, they usually don't turn back and forth.
or they're a wolf. There's a couple of stories where they're a wolf for 7 years and they're allowed to transform back.
Yeah, or yeah, like there's sort of that Lady Hawk thing where or it's like, the one guy turns into a wolf by day, or no, wolf at night,
Wolf at
and
night,
she's
she turns
she's
into
a
a
hawk by
bird.
day.
And she was a hawk by day.
Yeah, so they would be separated, but which technically makes him, Rutger Hauer, a werewolf, which is awesome.
Well,
But,
Rutger Hauer is amazing.
And
So
her
can we just
werewolf.
talk about the
Werewolf.
awesome reverse werewolf that Terry Pratchett had?
Terry Pratchett had a lot of fun things. Remind me a little better.
There was essentially a reverse version of the werewolf where he was normally a wolf, like 24 hours a day, 7 days a week,
Mhm.
and then when the moon cycle shifted, he would turn into the
Into a
hybrid
person.
version.
Nice.
He
The
turned-
X
He turned
Files
into an actual hybrid.
in
we
the
never
It's
recent
been done several times.
Yeah, in the recent
Patrick
season of
Thomas
X
said
Files,
that
they
at
did
one
a thing like that where the monster accidentally turned into a human for a while and was freaking out. And it
Well,
was
there's a
rather
whole-
funny episode.
Other subsect of shifter lore. Don't want to call it werewolf lore per se,
Like
because
Kitsune.
there are billions of other.
cats.
Pretty much every major culture, whatever, almost always, with at least one exception I'm aware, or maybe two exceptions I'm aware of, it's always predators. The exception being bison. There are shamans in Native American cultures that consider
Yeah.
them bison.
Well, because again, they
Yeah.
respected those
Because
animals and they
the
had
bi-
great
it's
symbolic
the bison and the importance to look
Yeah.
other people.
bison, the white
But
buffalo.
it's usually predators. And while most of the time it's humans become beasts, there are legends like Kitsune.
Yep.
There are
Long-tailed
tigers
cats.
in Vietnam. There are lions in Africa
Mhm.
that are animals that turn into people.
Yes, and use that to their advantage. There's I think jackal men in or hyena men in African
Africa.
lore.
There's a
And
couple
the
of African
hyena,
lore.
for the legends that did survive, because they actually covered it, I think in Buffy, and I think that was actually one of the few factual things that they actually tried to lend some credible light to.
And I was gonna say, as much as I love Buffy, it's not a good source on folklore.
No, but
No,
they
they didn't
do-
even try
they-
most of the time.
well, there were occasions that they did try, and then there was try.
Mhm.
But I believe the hyenas was actually a thing. I'm not so sure.
I'm
about
pretty
that
sure you're
myself.
right. That's
They
something.
used the idea of spirit.
Well,
They
sort of
tried harder in
possession.
the beginning than they did
Yeah.
later on.
it's also very similar to to basically the idea of totemic magic,
Yes.
and particularly of the berserker or the Ulfzerkers, where it wasn't that somebody physically became an animal, but they took on the spirit of the animal to gain some of its power. That's a common concept in magical traditions all over the world, quite honestly.
Which is one of the reasons why I like the movie Wolf with Jack Nicholson, because they kind of explored that side of it a little more than the physical, turning into a wolf man. And there was some of that too, but at least they gave some time to.
Here's an
that
age-old
idea.
question.
Oh, here we go.
Because, well, we've already dismissed that the classic question of what happens when a werewolf bites a vampire is sort of irrelevant. But what happens when a zombie bites a vampire bites a zombie?
I've seen
Um,
that.
And
Generally, the vampire gets sick to his
along
stomach.
with the question of are vampire zombies, sort of. And
Uh,
yeah, they kind of they're more in common with zombies than they do with or they have more common with movie zombies than actual folklore zombies have to do with movie zombies.
Yes. Most of what people think of now as zombies were the vampires. So really, they kind of are. They're just the risen dead that feed on the living. So by that very loose definition, yeah, the modern zombie totally fits as a type of vampire. They're just
There are vampire
to me-
types that do feed on flesh.
oh yeah, there's ones that eat flesh.
Hey, one of my
Those are still
favorites.
rare though,
Eat all kinds of
because
other
there's
things.
still essentially live zombies.
Well,
In certain lore as well, like they still have a pulse.
Well, those are the
live
real
zombies are actual zombies.
Yeah,
are
that's-
actual real things.
That's the actual like folkloric definition of a zombie,
Okay. So actual zombie lore 101,
as opposed to a revenant.
a zombie is a person whose soul has been taken away by a bokor, which is a practitioner of evil magic in Haitian voodoo. In Haitian voodoo, there are most forms of voodoo, most pagan religious concepts. Actually, there's this idea of what in voodoo they would call the Mamaloa or the Hongan, which is a priest that works magic for the benefit of the tribe, and then there's a Bokor who is a black magician who works magic for his own end and does curses and things of that nature. Bokors are the ones that create zombies. We know, because of the work of an ethnobotanist by the name of Wade Davis, that most likely, we know from, as a matter of recent history, that zombies are a thing. They're not just folklore. But it's probably the result of tetrodotoxin, which is the poison you find in pufferfish. There's a man by the name of Clairvaux Narcissa in the 1970s who was declared dead at a Haitian hospital by two doctors, one of whom was trained in the United States, and was found alive after being buried. Was found alive 10 years later.
Yep, and had worked on a farm and
Forced to,
as
in fact,
a
by a
slave and
Bokor.
managed to escape.
So here's a question. And normal people would either point to vampires or zombies as the overused monster. What would your opinion be on the overused monster?
Zombies.
Easily zombies.
I'm sick of zombies, but then I'm kind of biased. I
Well-
want to see vampires, make another comeback, and I want to be part of that.
I would say first and foremost it's zombies, and secondly, which is more of a product of how much I loathe the Anne Rice style of vampire. The next one would be a close second to me would be vampires. I think werewolves done well is an underutilized thing.
Yes,
Yes.
I would like, and again, that's one of the reasons why I want to do my bring that one
Yeah.
book back is because I do handle the werewolves in a different way than normal, because I'm kind of tired of the Larry Talbot, trope where they just do the poor cursed guy that suddenly becomes this bloodthirsty monster, which it's great as a psychological idea. It's a nice metaphor, but it's overused.
And originally, it wasn't even supposed. As I understand it, the original plan and the original screenplay wasn't supposed to be an actual transformation. It was supposed to be a psychological thing in a play,
Yes,
basically Jekyll and Hyde and playing with him going insane type of situation.
so that's exactly what it was supposed to be.
And because I think particularly because She Wolf of London had done something similar
And it bombed.
before, and it bombed. But I didn't think it was that.
It was not a
terrible
bad movie, but it did not do well, and they said they didn't want to do
Yeah, there's
that.
a
They
difference
wanted a real
between
monster.
it bombing and is a bomb.
Yeah,
Yeah, it
is
wasn't
true.
necessarily a bad movie.
It just didn't do
It just
well.
didn't do well. So they didn't want to follow that up with another similar.
To address though, it's more and more off topic, but Legend pointed out the Florida attacks by the guy who stabbed a couple 8 faces and such. That
Ah,
were
yes.
people,
Good old bath salt zombie.
the bath salts, and connected them to zombies. Not again, as we've gone to some lengths to clarify, that's not really a zombie in a part. It's a one. It's tying into movie zombies, not anything remotely related to the folklore. And two, quite bluntly, it's mental illness and drug addiction. It's
Yeah.
not a zombie.
Well, it's like how any serial killer that does anything involving blood usually immediately gets called a vampire or something.
And in fairness, Ted Bundy himself, one of the most infamous serial killers in U.S. history, said in court, "Sometimes I feel like a vampire."
Mhm.
And on the zombie end of the spectrum, Jeffrey Dahmer drilled holes in the heads of his victims and
Yep.
poured acid in an attempt to turn them into his personal slaves. And he called that much more accurately zombies.
Yes.
Because basically that's what he was trying to do, was create living zombies.
Yeah.
People totally subservient to his will. There is, I mean,
Ramirez out in California who
Right,
was called a vampire.
and is a very much an
Was more of a
outspoken
Satanist.
Satanist.
Yeah.
The serial killer connection to the occult is easily a series of shows into itself.
Yes.
And we will be getting there.
Well, let's get back to talking about me and my books.
Yes, because to answer
Yes.
the question real quick before we get back to
Sure.
the all important Brian.
Yes.
No, cannibalism isn't really considered a zombie.
No.
We'll have to do it. We have to do an episode.
Hannibal
sometime.
Lecter is not a zombie.
Now I'm just remembering something freaky. Apparently now you can be cremated and turned into a cake.
Yeah.
Why not?
I personally prefer the getting turned into a diamond.
Although
That
actually
would
some
be
studies
cooler.
that have been done, those diamonds, there's no evidence of human DNA in them.
Now,
Um,
There's a whole bunch of questions that have been raised about
Yeah.
the honesty of the process. And,
that's a shame.
Personally, I want to be cremated and used as fertilizer for a boysenberry tree.
I want one of two things.
Interesting.
One, I'll have to look at the laws at the state. Hopefully, years from now, there are actually states these days that will allow your body to just be buried in the earth without having to go through the ridiculous airtight sealed container crap that we have to do
Oh
today.
yeah.
And I'd love to have that done with me because it's like, no, as Neil deGrasse Tyson put in an interview, it's like, no, let my body decompose, let the energy that I am made up of come back to the earth and serve its natural purpose. Failing that, cremate my backside.
Yeah. Why take up room in a cemetery somewhere for no
Well,
reason?
also as a devout Christian in 20 years of investigating the paranormal, when I die, this is an empty meat sack. Don't care.
Yep.
It's just a meat sack. Get rid of it. Have a party. I'm in a better place.
Yeah, but particularly why a boysenberry tree is I had one on the side of the house growing up. And I always loved grabbing the boysenberries and eating them.
Oh, nice.
So back to Brian.
Yeah. By the way, I don't have any particular strong wishes about like what to do with my ashes or whatever. I don't know. I should think about that because it might come up and it'd be cool
I think
to
my
have
favorite,
something.
personal favorite answer to that was James the Amazing Randy's answer. So for our listeners who don't, if anyone doesn't know, James Randy's, I loathe to put it this way, but the short version would be the Houdini of our day, who's been a magician who's made a life out of debunking the paranormal.
Yeah.
And there's so much I could say on that subject, but one of his big claims to fame was debunking a self-proclaimed psychic by the name of Uri Geller, who would bend spoons with the power of his mind. Although now he started to admit that he's basically a magician. And Randy has said that when he died, he wanted to be cremated and have his ashes float in Geller's face. And I have to give respect to that as an idea. So
Thought about that. You could mail my ashes to Stephanie Meyer and tell her it's like arsenic or
No. What we'll do
food
is
flavoring.
yeah.
no. What we'll do is we'll dress it up like a little present, and then when she opens it, it explodes in her face.
Yeah.
Yes.
There you go.
There we
Or
go.
make you into a
We
cake.
figured out what to do with Brian. We're
There we
going
go.
to make him an explosion. There's also the other great suggestion that I've seen made of I want to be buried with a spring-loaded mechanism and a lot of confetti, so that in the distant future, some archaeologist has a really weird day.
Nice.
So because we are nearing the end of the show, talk
Yes,
a little.
that went fast.
Yeah. So your book, Drawing Death.
Yes.
As I recall, there's some interesting things going on with that. Do you want to talk about it? Is there any good news about it?
Sadly, not yet. Not yet. There, I will mention that it is currently under consideration by a television production company for being turned into or shopped around as a TV series. I'm hoping for like cable, like sort of a cable outlet, premium, where they could do all the stuff they want to do and not have to worry about like censorship and all. But yeah, I've been really proud of that book. It's my gangster vampire mashup, and it's gotten a lot of good feedback.
And there's also the other very important project you're supposed to be working on, which is the story in the Ancient series that's going to involve me.
Yes. I'm still thinking that the problem with that is the plot. I've got the basic stuff, but I have no idea like what the actual plot should be, and I'm really bad at writing short stories.
So
That's-
make it a novel. I don't mind.
there's not enough there for a novel, but unfortunately,
Could be a funny subplot in a
but
novel.
yeah, Kevin might be showing up as a character in my world. There's a possibility I might even weave either you or at least a mention of you into the third book.
Nice.
Because there's going to be so much stuff going on that falls into your kind of wheelhouse that if Avery knows you, it's impossible for him
Not to address it.
to not think of you. So there might be, at the very least, like maybe a Facebook conversation between him and you where he asks you about certain things. Yeah, not for any reason, just asking for a friend.
Just asking for research.
Yeah, I'm writing.
Scientific purposes.
I'm writing a book. I'm writing a novel. It's always a good one.
Funny enough, Glenn Chad's latest question was the one I basically asked. Because
Nice.
just wanted to know if any of your books, any chance of them hitting the silver screen, and it's like we basically covered that.
We can hope. If anybody out there is interested in looking for material for like a good movie or something,
We
give
got
me
3
a
books
call
and
or
counting.
drop me a line. I am happy to talk about any sort of adaptation. I've been wanting to do like a comic book or graphic novel adaptation for a while. I've really always thought that Drawing Dead especially would make a really good kind of graphic novel.
So on that note, since we're getting towards the end, do you have any upcoming appearances or projects you want to give a plug to?
Probably the biggest one would be coming up is Wicked Fair.
Yeah,
Princeton.
we need. I was going to bring up Wicked Fair.
So,
So what
yeah.
are you doing at Wicked Fair for? a
I'm
start?
going to be giving my world famous or state famous vampires in literature, folklore, and film presentation.
It's a pretty good
at-
presentation.
I like to think so. I try to make adjustments and improvements each time I do it. When
It's also what earned you the seat here, basically.
it is true. It's how me and Kevin wound up meeting at.
Firstly, though, I would like to just combine all of our various knowledge on vampires and vampire movies and books and all that. Just
Well,
have
not to mention my friend-
big panel on it.
My friends, one of whom is a psychologist or psychiatrist, who's worked with psychopaths, and the other of which is actually a woman who has studied the history of death and how it relates, does lectures on vampire lore. So Wicked Fair, which is coming up in February, let me give
One
you
of
the
these
dates
days is a real
for
big
those.
vampire extravaganza.
Yeah.
February 2nd to the 4th, I believe.
So Brian and I are
Really?
both going to be speaking there.
Yes.
And
and I'll
that's-
also be there as part of the whole Paranormal Encyclopedia
Yes.
thing.
We are going to do it won't be through the radio show just because of logistics of technology, but we are going to do a live broadcast on YouTube from the show in the afternoon on Friday. We are going to do a EVP session, and I'm gonna bring the ghost box so anyone who comes to Wicked Fair can check both of those gizmos out with us. We're gonna drag Brian along for the ride and make him sit through it as much of a scaredy cat as he is.
So of course.
Um,
We'll also have cool merchandise available.
Oh, yes. And we're-
links.
I don't remember the time of the first thing, but the EVP session, to be appropriate, is going to start at 11:30, which means yes, we will be trying to talk to dead people at midnight on. And then Saturday, I'm
That's the time
particularly
for it.
excited because Saturday at midnight, I'm going to be doing first for me, which is I'm going to be doing a magic act.
Nice. I
Oh.
think my thing is on Friday. I have to double check the schedule. It's
I need to
either
find
Friday
out
or
if
Saturday.
We need to make sure it doesn't conflict with either of mine for dragging you along.
Yeah, we better.
Hell, I have not heard back on whether or not me and Glenchen are on the schedule for our conning on a budget panel.
I hope so. So, folks, if anyone who's wondering what the heck we're talking about with this Wicked Fair thing, wickedfair.com, it is a 16 plus Renaissance fair goth kink paranormal fantasy
Alternative,
horror science fiction
steampunk,
alternative steampunk event in
Princeton.
New Jersey.
There's really nothing else like Wicked Fair ever.
Yeah.
Hopefully, I need to get in touch with him again to check. But I'm going to try to have the ever wonderful Jeff Mock, who is the evil mastermind behind Wicked Fair, on the show between now and then to help promote it. It's a really fantastic event. It's very much fun. We'll all be there. You can come meet us, come hang out, and come to all our cool panels. So with that said, the last thing to plug is what's happening next week. Next week we're gonna have a little bit of a twofer because I'm also finally that we've narrowed it down to a week at least. I get to announce a project I've been working on. So first of all, we're going to have a very good friend of mine who listeners who've been here since day one will remember as the very first person to call in fact, which is Omnimancer Arthur Moyer. Arthur is a magician, and when I say I do a magic act, I'm going to do the whole pick a card, any card. When Arthur does magic, we mean magic, in the paranormal sense of the word. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about omnimancy, which is a very interesting magical tradition that Arthur himself founded. He will be here. Although he won't be in studio, unfortunately, because he has other commitments too close to when it ends, so he'll be calling in. But he's a great guy. He'll be a lot of fun to have on. And then there's the project that I'm working on. So, folks, if you go to YouTube and look up Chocolate Hat, he is an atheist and a skeptic. So basically, he is the arch enemy as a Christian paranormal guy. But he's actually a really good guy. He's very well, we obviously disagree on a number of points. He's a very respectful guy. He and I have been talking since before Christmas about collaborating. And it looks like next weekend we are going to do a Google Hangouts where we are going to talk about evolution and the Big Bang and common misconceptions people have about them. What will make this different for me, since I am the token Christian in this conversation, what will make this a little bit different is we're talking about the myths creationists have about evolution. We're making a case for evolution. Particularly, my point is going to be coming across as you can believe in evolution and still believe in God of the Bible. So stay tuned. He's actually going to call in. It looks like towards the end of the show next week, so we'll talk a little bit about what we're planning, and we'll talk a little bit about his channel, and then we'll have more information for you about what's going on. And you should all definitely come check that out next week. Is there anything else we should cover before we get out of here?
Well, my books are all available on Amazon.com.
Drawing Dead, Ancient Enemies,
and Ancient Blood. Yeah, you can also find that and information about me on my website, which is www.brianmckinleyauthor.com.
And if you don't want to pay for the books, ask your local library to bring them in.
Yes, please do that anyway, just because the more they get out, the better.
And they're also available on Audible, are they?
Yes, that's right. They're all audio, recorded by a very talented voice actor named Brian Rollins. He does a great job with them, and generally you can get the first one free if you're trying Audible for the first time.
We need to contact them about getting one of those codes where you get the free month's membership thing.
Oh, yeah.
I
was going to say, I can give you codes to a couple of these for free. But
maybe we'll do that as a giveaway at some point. Keep in mind as well that, if you buy Brian's books on Amazon, February 2nd to the 4th, come to Wicked Fair. I'm sure Brian will be happy to sign them for you.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
You'll have copies to sell there as well?
I will indeed.
We're going to try and, Misha and I are going to try and put something paranormal related to sell, as well as the various show merchandise at the event. So it'll be a lot of fun. But that is going to wrap it up for tonight. I want to thank everybody for listening. Please remember to check us out on Facebook and YouTube as Paranormal Encyclopedia, spelled just like it is on the screen. When you look it up, just Paranormal Encyclopedia. If you can help us out, please remember www.patreon.com/demonology, patreon.com/demonology. Any small amount of money always helps. And you can, if you have problems with the paranormal, if you have no one else to turn to, do remember you can email me at kevinm.paranormalencyclopedia@gmail.com. If you're within reasonable driving distance of me, there is no charge for my services. If you're not, I will help. We'll work something out, or I will help you find somebody who lives locally enough to you to make it feasible. But that's it for tonight. Have a good night and God bless.
Thank you, Brian. You've been a wonderful guest.
Oh, thank you. Actually, no, Brian, you were an absolutely terrible
That was
guest.
a terrible guest. Yeah, he's right.
You're not invited to ever come back, except every week is a
Except
co-host.
every week.
Yeah.
Good night.
You want to say good night, honey?
Night.